The Galactic Council broke humanity. Humanity broke reality. The verdict was already decided before I opened my mouth. I knew it the moment I walked into the convocation chamber and saw 900 alien delegates seated in perfect, rehearsed silence. There was no murmur, no shuffling, none of the usual chaos that filled this hall when a genuine debate was about to happen. They had already voted. They had already agreed. They had brought me here not to hear my case but to watch me receive it. My name is Yara Solis. I was 31 years old, a commander in the Earth Diplomatic Corps, and I was the only human being in a chamber built to hold every recognized civilization in the known galaxy. The air smelled like something between copper and rain. The lights were too blue. The seats rose in curved tiers above me like the inside of a skull, and at the very top, framed by 2 columns of pale light, sat Council Speaker Vorth Cal. He was old, even by Valorian standards. His skin was the color of ash, his eyes silver and expressionless, his long fingers folded on the podium in front of him like he was already bored. He had governed this council for over 2 centuries. He had presided over the admission of 47 species to galactic standing. He had also presided over the disciplinary hearings of 11 others. I was there for hearing number 12. The charge was intellectual theft. That was the official language. Humanity had, without permission, without license, and without any formal request to the Council Technology Bureau, obtained and reverse-engineered a Valorian faster-than-light drive. We had taken it apart, understood it, rebuilt it, and this was the part that truly offended them, we had improved it by a measurable margin. They did not call it impressive, they called it dangerous. I had spent 4 months preparing my defense. I had case files, historical precedents, 3 independent expert testimonies, and a formal appeal citing the Universal Development Charter, Article 9, which protected pre-class civilizations from embargo on the basis of natural technological progression. I had stayed up past midnight for 6 weeks, rehearsing every answer to every question they might ask. None of it mattered. Vorth Cal raised one hand before I could speak. The chamber, already quiet, somehow became quieter. "Commander Solis," he said. His translator rendered his voice as low and precise, the tone of a man reading a result he found personally distasteful. "The Council has completed its review of the Earth sovereignty matter. The deliberation required 4 sessions. The outcome was not close." I stood my ground on the platform in the center of the chamber floor. Below me, the floor was transparent, a full view of open space beneath my feet, stars drifting slowly past. It was a design choice meant to remind speakers of their smallness. I had been warned about it. I looked down at it for exactly 2 seconds, then looked back up at Vorth Cal and kept my eyes there. "The Council recognizes that humanity is a young species," he continued. "Impulsive, often emotional, prone to acquiring before understanding, and to acting before considering the effect of those actions on established order. This is not unique to your kind. However, the severity of the recent breach, combined with your species' history of what this council classifies as persistent boundary testing, has brought the deliberation to a unanimous conclusion." He paused. I think he wanted me to ask what the conclusion was. I did not ask. I waited. Earth and all affiliated human settlements are to be placed under a full resonance embargo, effective 72 standard hours from this reading. All faster-than-light corridors connecting Sol System to the galactic network will be collapsed and sealed. No trade convoys, no communications relays, no transit vessels, no emergency access. Sol will be removed from the living map of the galaxy for a period of no less than 50 standard years, at which point a review may be requested. The chamber did not react, not because they were unmoved but because they had known. This had been decided. This was theater. "During this period," Vorth Cal said, "humanity will be expected to reflect on its place in the broader galactic community. You will have the opportunity to demonstrate, in isolation, whether your species possesses the discipline required to one day join that community as a trusted member. If you do not survive the process, he tilted his head slightly, then the answer is self-evident. I heard those words land. I felt them the way you feel a door closing behind you in a dark room. I looked at the chamber. I looked at the veiled delegate who had smiled when the sentence was read. I looked at the Keth representative who had not bothered to look at me once. I looked at the 3 scifistory members who shared a quiet word with each other, already moving on, already forgetting. I looked at all 900 of them, every angle, every face, every species that had looked through me like I was a problem being processed rather than a person being heard. Vorethkal folded his hands again. You may respond, Commander, though the record should reflect the verdict is not subject to revision at this stage. I stood for a moment in silence. Then I did something nobody in that chamber expected. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was small and precise, the kind that says I understand something you do not yet know I understand. I had not planned it. It simply arrived on my face, because in that exact moment, something settled inside me with a quiet and permanent click. They thought they were punishing us. They thought they were sending a child to its room. What they were actually doing was leaving us alone with our own minds. They were removing every distraction, every dependency, every outside signal, every borrowed idea, every handed-down assumption about how the universe worked. They were sealing us in a box with our own curiosity and calling it a sentence. I made a decision in that moment, not a dramatic one, not a loud one, just a quiet, absolute decision made in the back of my chest where decisions that actually last are made. I would come back to this chamber. I would walk through that door again. And when I did, they would stand up. Thank you, Speaker Vorethkal, I said. I have no revision to request. I appreciate the clarity. I turned and walked out of the chamber. My footsteps were steady and even, the sound of them carrying back up through the tiered rows above me, through 900 witnesses who believed they had just watched humanity receive its ending. They had watched something else entirely. They had watched it begin. The ship that took me home was called the Alderton, a mid-class diplomatic carrier, 12 crew, older than most of the pilots on board. I sat in the forward observation bay for most of the return journey and watched the faster-than-light corridors pass by shimmering tunnels of curved space, maintained by the Council's relay network, stitching the galaxy together like thread through cloth. 72 hours, then those threads would be cut from us. Sol's system would go dark on every galactic map. Humanity would be, for the first time since contact, genuinely alone. My second-in-command, Lieutenant Henry Vale, brought me coffee at some point during the 3rd day. He was 24, quiet, competent, with the kind of steady demeanor that made him excellent in a crisis and slightly dull at dinner parties. He sat across from me without speaking for a while, watching the same stars. "Do you want me to start the grievance documentation?" he asked finally. "No," I said. "Do you want to send a preliminary report to the directorate?" "Yes, tell them the verdict. Tell them we have 72 hours before the embargo activates. Tell them to start preparing." "Preparing for what?" I looked at the corridor of bent space outside the window. In a few days, that would be closed to us. All of it. The entire galactic highway, built by species who had been sailing it for 80,000 years, every shortcut and bypass and relay point gone. We would be back to our own sun, our own planets, our own electromagnetic signals crawling out into the dark at the speed of light. Back to ourselves. "Tell them," I said, "that it is time to stop borrowing other people's thinking." Henry looked at me for a moment, then nodded once and left. I stayed in the observation bay until we crossed back into Sol space, until the sun came into view ahead of us, steady and yellow and familiar, and behind us, like a curtain being drawn across a window, the corridor collapsed. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. And then, slowly, with the particular kind of patience that forms when you have absolutely nothing left to lose, I picked up a pen and a blank notebook and started writing down every assumption about physics that humanity had accepted without ever checking for ourselves. By the time we reached Earth orbit, I had filled 43 pages. It was a beginning. The embargo started on a Tuesday. I remember that specifically because Henry had made a small note of it in the mission log, with the kind of dry, bureaucratic precision that would have been funny in any other context. Galactic isolation of the human species commenced. Seoul Standard Time, Tuesday, 14:22. Weather in New London, overcast. The first year was hard. I will not pretend otherwise. The economic disruption was significant. 600 trade agreements dissolved overnight. 14 medical supply chains that had depended on galactic corridor access went dark. 2 outer colony stations, still under construction with materials sourced from Council-aligned suppliers, had to halt operations mid-build. People were angry, and they had every right to be. But here is the thing about humanity that the Council never quite understood, and that I think no species fully understands about itself until the moment it is tested. We do not unify around comfort. We unify around problems. When the corridors closed, something shifted. It was not visible at first. It moved underneath the anger and the grief and the logistical chaos, the way bedrock moves slowly, enormously, and without announcing itself. Within 6 months, research funding on Earth had tripled. Within a year, 3 separate government bodies had merged their physics programs. Within 18 months, a young theoretical physicist named Ren Callies, who at that point was 26 years old and working out of a university lab in Edinburgh, had published a paper that most of his peers initially dismissed. The paper was called On the Presumed Constants of Spatial Traversal, a First Inquiry. It was 41 pages long. 30 of those pages were math. The other 11 were in plain English, and they said, in careful and deliberate language, the following. The Galactic Council's faster-than-light technology rests on a foundational assumption about the geometry of space that has never been empirically tested. It has been inherited, generation to generation, species to species, for 80,000 years because it works. But working is not the same as being correct. And if the assumption is even slightly wrong, then the entire architecture built on top of it is not the most efficient path. It is simply the most popular one. I read it 3 times in one sitting. Then I picked up the phone and called the Earth Directorate's chief science officer, a man named Paul Greaves, and told him to find Ren Callies, fund him without limit, and put a wall of security clearance around his work before anyone outside our team could see what direction he was going. Paul asked me if I had read the paper or just the summary. I said I had read every word. There was a pause, then Paul said, "You think he's onto something?" "I think," I said carefully, "that the Council spent 80,000 years building a highway, and I think they built it so long ago that they forgot to ask whether the highway was necessary." Paul was quiet for a moment, and if it isn't. I looked out my window at the night sky. The stars were the same. They had always been the same. It was only the roads between them that had ever belonged to someone else. "If it isn't necessary," I said, "then we don't need their permission to reach them." Ren Callies was not what I expected. I had been told he was brilliant. That was accurate. I had been told he was difficult. That was an understatement. He was 26 years old, extremely thin, wore the same worn jacket to every meeting, and had the habit of answering questions with a longer question that made you feel like you had misunderstood something fundamental about reality, which, as I would eventually understand, was usually because you had. Our first meeting was in Edinburgh in his lab, which was cluttered with notebooks and half-empty mugs of tea and printouts covered in handwritten corrections. He shook my hand without looking at me, immediately turned back to a whiteboard that took up an entire wall and said, "The Valorians didn't discover their drive. They inherited it from the Seth. The Seth inherited it from the Teresi. The Teresi inherited it from a species we don't have a name for that existed 40,000 years ago. Nobody, in 40,000 years of using this technology, ever asked the original question." "What question?" I asked. He turned around for the first time and looked at me directly. He had dark eyes and a slightly distracted expression, like part of his brain was always running a background calculation he couldn't quite pause. "Whether space has a distance at all," he said, "or whether distance is a story we tell because we haven't thought of a better one yet." I sat down. "Tell me everything," I said. What followed were 3 years of the most concentrated, relentless, and genuinely extraordinary scientific work I had ever witnessed. Ren was not alone. Over time, a team formed around him, 12 researchers drawn from physics programs across Earth and the outer colonies. I will not pretend I understood all of their work. I am not a physicist. But I understood the direction of it, the shape of it, the way it moved, because I had spent 30 years in diplomacy learning to read not the words people used but the space between them. And what I read in that work in those 3 years was this: Ren was right. The assumption was wrong. Space did not have an inherent distance. Distance was a perception. It was a measurement taken from inside a particular reference frame, and it felt absolute because every species had always experienced it from inside the same frame. But if you stepped outside the frame, if you changed not your position in space but your relationship to the geometry of space itself, then the distance between 2 points was not a fixed quantity. It was a variable. And variables, unlike fixed walls, could be changed. The practical implications of this took another 4 years to work out. Ren called them the folding equations, a name that was too simple for what they actually described, but which stuck because Ren had the nomming instincts of someone who had never once cared what anything was called. The equations described a process by which a vessel could recalculate its geometric relationship to a target point, making the distance between origin and destination approach zero, without the ship physically traveling through the intervening space. It was not faster than light travel. It was not travel at all, in the traditional sense. It was more like telling the universe that 2 places were, for the purposes of this particular moment, the same place. When Ren explained this to me for the first time in terms I could follow, I sat very still for a long time. Then I said, "We don't need corridors." Ren poured himself another mug of tea. "We don't need corridors. We don't need the Council's relay network. We don't need anything they built, ever." I looked at him. He looked back at me, the same slightly distracted expression, the same background calculation running behind his eyes. And then, just once, the expression cleared completely, and he gave me a smile that was tired and proud and a little bit disbelieving, the smile of a man who had just spent 7 years of his life proving something he had always suspected but never been certain of. "Yara," he said quietly, "we can go anywhere." I did not say anything for a moment. I was thinking about a chamber with a transparent floor and 900 faces that had looked through me like I was nothing. "Yes," I said, "we can." We did not celebrate that night. There was too much work left. The theoretical framework was complete, but a theoretical framework is not a ship, and a ship is not a tested ship, and a tested ship is not a fleet, and a fleet is not a plan. We still had years ahead of us. But something had changed. Something fundamental and irreversible had shifted in the center of the project, in the center of all of us who were part of it, and I think we all felt it the same way, not as excitement exactly, but as weight. The weight of something real, something that could not be taken back. The Council had locked the door. We had found the door did not exist. The Alderton was long retired by the time we built the first folding vessel. We named her the Callies, for obvious reasons, and Ren spent 3 days arguing that it was an embarrassing name, and one day secretly looking very pleased about it. She was not a beautiful ship. She was compact and angular and built entirely around the folding drive at her core, 12 crew stations, a reinforced observation deck, no unnecessary weight. Her hull was a flat matte gray. She had no flags on her side, no Earth insignia, no markers at all. I had decided early on that when we went back, we would go back quietly. No announcements, no broadcasts, no build-up. We would simply arrive. The test flights took 11 months. The first 3 were unmanned. The 4th had 4 crew. The 5th had 12, and I was on board, standing at the forward station while Ren ran through the activation sequence from the engineering bay, talking into my earpiece in the same tone a person uses when diffusing something delicate. "Initiating geometric recalculation," he said. "This will feel strange." "Define strange," Henry said from his station. He was 41 now, had been with me since the beginning, still had the same steady demeanor and the same slightly long-suffering expression around Ren. "It will feel like nothing," Ren said, "and then you'll be somewhere else. The human nervous system finds it mildly disorienting because it expects the experience of travel to include duration. There will be no duration." "Ren," I said. "Yes. Just do it." There was a pause, then he said, folding. And then there was nothing. And then there was somewhere else. We were 2 light years from Seoul. Instantly. Without any sense of having moved, without any vibration or sound or flash of light. One moment we were in Earth's orbit, and the next moment Earth was a distant point of light 2 light years behind us, and the sun was just another star among stars, and the Callies was sitting in perfect silence in empty space with every system nominal. Henry stared out the forward viewport for a long time. "Right," he said finally, "that is strange." Ren made a sound over the earpiece that might have been a laugh. We ran 12 more test flights over the next 3 months. Every one of them was clean. The drive worked consistently, reliably, and with an energy cost so far below the Valorian corridor system that our own engineers kept rechecking the calculations, certain they had made an error. They had not. The Callies could fold to any point in the galaxy. Any point. No corridor, no relay station, no permission required. I spent the week after the final test sitting in my office in London, going through old files. I read back through the directorate reports from the first years of the embargo. I read the medical supply chain failures, the colony construction halts, the economic disruption estimates. I read the diplomatic notes from the Council's official liaison office, an office that had stopped sending messages in year 3 and had never resumed. I read the record of Vorethkal's sentence. I had kept a transcript of it. I had read it many times over the years, but I read it again now, slowly, all the way through. "Your species lacks the temperament for the stars." I set the transcript down. Then I picked up the radio and called Ren. "Are you ready?" I asked. There was a pause on the other end. I could hear him in his lab, the faint sound of his chair, the click of a mug on a desk. "I've been ready for 7 years," he said. "We leave Tuesday," I said. Henry made another small note in the mission log. We folded into the Council's Grand Convocation system at 0914 on a Wednesday morning. I had chosen the exact coordinates carefully. Not the outer approach corridor, not the diplomatic arrival bay, not any of the standard entry points. I had chosen the interior of the Grand Convocation Hall itself, the chamber where the sentence had been read, with its transparent floor and its tiered rows and its 900 seats. The hall was in session when we arrived. I know this because the Callies materialized exactly 200 meters above the main speaker's platform, in the empty space at the center of the chamber's upper dome, with a sound like a single quiet exhale. The only acoustic effect of a fold, the brief displacement of air, and every delegate in all 900 seats looked up at the exact same moment. Henry was standing next to me at the forward viewport. He looked down at the chamber below us, at the sea of alien faces staring up in complete and total silence, and he said very quietly, "They were not expecting that." "No," I said, "they were not." I opened the shipwide channel. "Ren, all systems." "All systems clean," Ren said. "The drive is stable. We're not going anywhere unless you ask." "Good." I opened the external communications array. "This is Commander Yara Solis of the Earth diplomatic vessel Callies. We are requesting an immediate address to the Galactic Council. We are not carrying weapons. We are not transmitting a distress signal. We are here to deliver a document." The silence from the council chamber below lasted for a very long time. Then Speaker Vorethkal's voice came through the array. He was older, 30 years older, but his voice was the same, low, precise, and controlled, or almost controlled. There was something underneath the control now that had not been there before. "Commander Solis," he said, "you are in violation of an active embargo order." "Yes," I said, "I know." Another silence. "How did you," he stopped, started again. "You should not be able to enter this system. The corridors to Sol were collapsed and sealed 30 years ago." "They were," I agreed. "We did not use a corridor." I looked down through the viewport at the chamber below. I looked at the tiered rows. I looked at 900 delegates who were no longer sitting with the ease of people watching a problem being processed. They were sitting with the stillness of people who had just realized they did not fully understand what was happening. It was a good feeling. "Speaker Vorethkal," I said, "I believe we have a document to discuss. Would you prefer I bring it down in person, or would you like to send someone up?" There was a very long pause. "Come down," he said. I nodded to Henry, "Dock us at the platform." "Pleasure," Henry said, and began the sequence. I went to the back of the ship and put on my uniform. It was a new design. Earth had developed its own dress code during the embargo, no longer following Council standard diplomatic protocols. It was clean and dark, with a single small symbol on the collar, a circle folded in half, touching itself. Ren had designed it. I had thought it was too on the nose. I wore it anyway. The document I carried was a single-bound volume, 40 pages, printed on Earth paper. The first 26 pages were a revised application for Class I sovereign status for the human species, fully formatted, legally precise, with every required attachment. The last 14 pages were a mathematical proof. The proof demonstrated 3 things. First, that the entire galactic corridor system rested on a flawed geometric assumption. Second, that humanity had identified and corrected that assumption. Third, that the corrected version of the mathematics revealed a structural fragility in every existing faster-than-light relay station in the galactic network, a fragility that could, under specific conditions, cause a cascade failure of the entire network simultaneously. We had no intention of triggering that failure. We never had. We had not built the folding drive as a weapon, and we were not going to use it as one. But they did not know that yet. And for exactly as long as it took them to read 14 pages of mathematics, every species in that chamber was going to feel, for the first time in their very long and very comfortable galactic existence, what it felt like to be uncertain. The hatch opened. I walked down the ramp onto the speaker's platform. The chamber above me, all 900 seats, was completely silent. I set the document on the podium. Then I looked up at Vorethkal, who was standing now, which he had not done at our last meeting, and I gave him the same small, precise smile I had given him 30 years ago on my way out. "We would like to discuss terms," I said. The session that followed lasted 9 days. I will not recount every hour of it. Some of it was technical, some of it was procedural, and some of it was simply the very long and uncomfortable process of 900 species recalibrating their understanding of where humanity stood. That recalibration was not fast. It was not graceful, but it was thorough. On the first day, 3 council species requested that the Callies be impounded, and its drive disabled pending review. I declined politely and explained that impounding a vessel that could reposition itself to any coordinate in the galaxy at will was a theoretical exercise rather than a practical option. On the second day, the Keth delegation proposed a military response. They were a militant species, aggressive by cultural formation, and their representative was a large, dark-scaled individual named Tevrath, who had spent the first day staring at me with an expression that communicated a very specific kind of resentment. The resentment of someone who has been proven wrong about something they were very confident about. On the second day, Tevrath formally submitted a motion to the Council for a military containment order against Earth. I was informed of this motion by Henry, who brought me the report in the small meeting room I had been assigned near the chamber floor. I read it. I folded the paper. I sent a single 2-word message to Wren back on the Callies. The message said, "Fold home." On the third day, the Keth launched 17 warships toward Sol System. It took them 4 days to arrive, because they were still using corridor travel. During those 4 days, the council session continued, and I said nothing about the approaching fleet, and I answered every question asked of me about the folding drive with complete honesty and full technical detail. When the Keth fleet arrived at the coordinates of Sol System on the 7th day, they found empty space. Not a destroyed solar system, not an evacuated one. Simply empty, clean, mathematically unremarkable space, as though the sun and its 8 planets and all of humanity had never been there at all. Sol was gone. The Keth fleet filed an emergency report to the Council. I was informed of it during a recess. I read it, put it on the table, and returned to my seat for the afternoon session without commenting. Vorthkal asked me, very quietly during a break in proceedings, where Earth was. "Safe," I said. "That is not." "It is the complete answer," I said. "Earth is safe. The human species is safe. And when we have reached an agreement that reflects our actual standing in this galaxy, I will tell you where Earth is." He looked at me for a long moment. I had been watching him throughout the 9 days, tracking the small changes in his expression, the gradual and incremental process of a very old and very certain mind encountering something it had not predicted. It was not pleasant for him. I did not need it to be pleasant. I needed it to be clear. "You moved your entire solar system," he said. It was not quite a question. "Yes." "That is," he paused, "that is not a thing that should be possible." "A great many things that should not have been possible turned out to be possible," I said, "once we stopped accepting other people's definitions of impossible." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You could have retaliated 30 years ago. If you had developed this capability earlier, you could have." "We didn't develop it earlier," I said, "because we weren't ready. And we didn't retaliate even now because we don't want what you have. We never wanted what you have. We wanted to be treated as equals. We still want that. The difference is that now you don't have the option of saying no." The afternoon session resumed. On the 8th day, humanity transmitted the full theoretical framework of the folding equations, freely, without restriction, encrypted for no one, to every non-council independent species in the galaxy. 114 species received the transmission simultaneously. Within 48 hours, every physics program on every one of those planets had begun working through the mathematics. The Council's monopoly on space travel did not end that day. Technology takes time to build, but its theoretical basis, the fundamental reason why every species in the galaxy had always depended on the Council's corridor network, dissolved in 48 hours. The control was gone. The leverage was gone. and every delegate in that chamber who understood the implications sat very quietly with that understanding. On the 9th day, Vorithkal called me to the central platform. The chamber was full, every seat occupied. I walked to the platform the same way I had walked out 30 years ago, steadily, evenly, without hurry. Vorithkal looked at me from across the podium. He was very old. In the light of the chamber, he looked like something carved rather than grown, old and hard and permanent. "The Council," he said, "has agreed to rescind the resonance embargo against Sol System. The Council further agrees to open a formal review of human sovereign standing under the Charter." He paused. "These are significant concessions." "Yes," I said, "they are. You understand that full Class 1 status will require." "We are not applying for Class 1 status," I said. The chamber moved. A quiet shifting, a murmur that ran through 900 seats. Vorithkal stopped. "I beg your pardon." "We are withdrawing the formal application," I said. "Class 1, Class 2, these are your categories, your taxonomy, your way of organizing who matters and who doesn't. We spent 30 years outside your taxonomy and we found the experience clarifying." I looked out at the chamber, at all the faces, at all the eyes that were fully on me now, entirely attentive, nothing being processed, nothing being dismissed. "We are not here to join your system. We are here to propose a different one." I set a second document on the podium. This one was thin, only 8 pages. "We are calling it the Open Lattice, a non-hierarchical galactic compact, no species above another. No embargo powers, no classification tiers, no council veto over who gets to reach the stars. Every species equal in standing from the moment of confirmed sentience. Enforced not by weapons but by the principle that no single entity, including humanity, controls the roads between worlds." "Including humanity," Vorithkal repeated. "We did not build the folding drive to replace your monopoly with ours," I said. "We built it because we wanted to go home. What we do with it afterward reflects what we actually are. And what we are is a species that does not want to be above anyone. We have spent 30 years below everyone. Neither position is right." The murmur in the chamber grew and then quieted. Vorithkal looked at the 8 pages. He looked at me. "This will take time to negotiate," he said. "We have time," I said. "Humanity has demonstrated remarkable patience over the last 30 years. It would be dishonest for me to say we expected it." "No," I agreed. "You expected us to fall apart. You expected isolation to do what embargo alone couldn't. You expected us to prove your assessment right." I paused. "We understand why. We were young. We were impulsive. We were by many reasonable measures not ready." I looked at him directly, steadily, the way I had looked at him across this same floor 30 years ago, on a day when he had all the power and I had had none. "We grew up. We would prefer to do it without an audience next time, but we managed." Vorithkal was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something I had not expected. His voice dropped slightly, losing its official register, becoming for a moment the voice of a very old individual rather than a council speaker. "I remember the day you left this chamber," he said. 30 years ago, I remember you smiled." "Yes. I did not understand it at the time. I know. I think I understand it now." I met his eyes. "I think you do." The session closed. The negotiations for the Open Lattice began that evening and ran for 2 years. I will not detail every session. Some of it was difficult, some of it was genuinely productive, and some of it was simply the long, necessary work of building something new in a galaxy that had operated on old assumptions for longer than humanity had been writing things down. But it moved, slowly, steadily, in the right direction. Henry retired 3 years after the council session. He had spent 42 years walking behind me, keeping logs, bringing coffee, and making quiet observations that were always more accurate than anyone else's. On his last day he shook my hand and said, "I want you to know that working for you has been the most interesting experience of my life, And I say that with complete sincerity and only mild trauma. I laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind you can only produce when you have finally, actually, arrived somewhere. Ren Callies did not retire. I doubt he ever will. He is still working. He is 61 years old now, still wearing the same style of worn jacket, still keeping his lab in a state that suggests a minor disaster recently concluded. He published 3 more papers in the years after the council session, each one exploring a different branch of the folding mathematics, each one pulling on a thread that opened onto a larger room than the one before. The 3rd paper he sent me without comment. No message, no explanation, just the file, and at the bottom of the final page, a single handwritten note in his cramped, difficult script. The note said, "We should talk about time." I read the paper, all 48 pages, including the 31 pages of mathematics, which I understood perhaps 40% of, and found enough in that 40% to keep me awake for 3 nights in a row. The folding equations, extended to their 3rd-order implications, suggested something that Ren had noted carefully and cautiously, and with more qualification than he usually bothered with. The recalculation of geometric relationships between points in space was, under certain extremely specific conditions, not limited to spatial dimensions. It applied to temporal ones as well. We had not told anyone this. I had thought about it many times, the shape of what it meant, the responsibility of it, the danger of it. I had thought about who we were as a species and what we had done with the power we had already acquired, and whether we had earned the next level of it, and whether such a thing could ever be truly earned rather than simply held carefully and used rarely and with great deliberation. I did not have the answer. I am not sure the answer exists in a form that fits neatly into a sentence. What I knew was this: we were still young. Even now, after everything, we were still a young species in a very old galaxy. And youth is not a flaw and it is not a weakness. It is a kind of potential, unformed and enormous, and what you become depends entirely on what you choose to do with the time you are given. I was 61 years old. I was standing on a balcony on Earth, the relocated Earth, orbiting a sun that now shone on constellations nobody had named yet, in a sky no human had ever looked at before. The air was the same. The gravity was the same. The smell of the evening was the same, that particular combination of cooling stone and distant vegetation, and the faint trace of rain that was not quite rain yet, that belonged to no other planet but home. My granddaughter was there. Her name was Nina, and she was 7 years old, and she had never known any other sky than this one. She stood beside me on the balcony with her head tilted back and her arms wrapped around herself against the chill, and she stared up at the unfamiliar stars with the absolute focused wonder of a child encountering something that the adults around her have not yet assigned a category to. "What are those ones called?" she asked, pointing at a cluster near the horizon, bright, close, forming a shape that if you looked at it the right way might have been a figure, or a letter, or simply a pattern that meant nothing at all until someone decided it did. I looked at them with her. I thought about the chamber with the transparent floor and the 900 faces. I thought about Henry's mission log and Ren's notebook and 43 pages of unchecked assumptions, and a folding drive sitting at the heart of a gray ship that had once materialized in the silence of a galactic chamber and changed the direction of everything. I thought about the paper sitting on my desk inside, 48 pages, the 3rd-order implications, the handwritten note that said we should talk about time. There was so much ahead, so much still unbuilt, still unresolved, still waiting in the dark beyond the edge of what we knew. The galaxy was enormous and we were small and the work was nowhere near finished. But we had time. We had all the time we needed. "We haven't named them yet," I told Nina. She considered this with great seriousness. "Can we?" I put my arm around her shoulders. She leaned into me, still looking up. "Yes," I said, "we absolutely can." We stood there together, the two of us, beneath a new sky full of unnamed stars, and somewhere behind us the universe was waiting, patient and vast and full of rooms we had not yet opened, and I was not afraid of any of them. We were humanity. We had been locked in the dark, and we had found a light the darkness itself did not know it contained. The galaxy had tried to teach us our place. What it had actually done was give us the time to realize we did not have one yet. And that was, in the end, the most powerful thing it could have possibly given us.